Good morning. And here we are again at the hybrid service of Second Unitarian Universalist Church of Omaha. We bring our message to the west side of Omaha, Nebraska. We are here to learn about and commit to living the 6 values of Unitarian Universalism: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. We welcome everyone here this morning. We bring a teaching of hope. We bring a saving message. We welcome all through our doors, the joyful, the heartbroken, atheists and Christians, pagans and Buddhists. We welcome people of all gender identities and sexual orientations. We welcome all who are searching, seeking, looking for more meaning, more service, more love. All of us are gathered here to walk each other home. Our Soul Matters theme for the month of August is invitation. My name is Chris Peters, and I'm serving as your worship associate this morning, along with our settled minister, Reverend Juniper Meadows, who is back. As our first act of worship, I'd like to invite everybody to stand and greet the people around you. Sarah will open the gallery view in Zoom, so our remote...
Oh, good morning, friends. You know, when you come back from a vacation, you're always wondering, you get up here, you're like, I do this for a living? My God. And this morning we're celebrating Labor Day. Tomorrow, our 3-day weekend, heralding the end of summer, the beginning of school. For some folks, school's already begun. But in this space, friends, I invite us to find our center and to center on what this day coming up is truly about. How it is hard-won blood, sweat, and tears. Let us make this time sacred, as that luminary of our tradition, Sophia Lyons-Boz, said so well. Life becomes religious when we make it so. May we make it so together. Chris, would you light our chalice for us this morning? And hear this chalice lighting in honor of Labor Day. We light this chalice to honor all who labor, all whose work builds roads and rails, shapes towers and tacos, all whose work feeds minds and binds wounds, all who love this world into the wonders we have made. May you find a part of you in this flame, the drive, the passion, the righteously demanded dignity we have inherited. In the light of this flame, may we name an 8-hour day a holy thing, pay time off, a prophetic message from a better future, born from a harder past of picketers and Pullman, teachers and SAG-AFTRA. As this flame turns fuel to light and heat, so too may our labors turn this world towards love, inviting an unflinching solidarity. Amen, and blessed be. The covenant is a living promise we make about how we choose to be together in this space, and our covenant is adapted largely from James Villa Blake's Love is the Spirit of this Church. Sarah, will you share our slide? I invite you, as you feel so called, friends, to say this with me. Love is the spirit of this church, the quest for truth its sacrament, and this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth and love, and to help one another believe more fully in life. And because Spanish is the second most commonly spoken language in this country, not because we're fluent, I invite you all to try to read our covenant in Spanish as well, friends. Let us do our best. El amor es el espíritu de nuestra iglesia, la búsqueda de la verdad, nuestro sacramento. Y esto es nuestro gran acuerdo, que convivamos en paz, que busquemos la verdad en el amor, y que nos ayudemos uno al otro a creer más en la vida. Amen. Thank you, friends. We're getting good at that. We've spoken much here about the manifold qualities of love, how love is not a simple, cheap, purchasable, or plastic thing, but a diverse and a complex force. And while we named our 6 sources, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, that JETPIG acronym is working for me, y'all. It works. It works. Love must be at the center of those. Love binds all of these together. It is love that brings us to such a place across differences towards a common aim of considering what builds this land we are in, and what is this day coming up about? As a person from a decidedly blue-collar background, I have a special relationship with Labor Day. I've never really belonged to a union. You could say I kind of do now with the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association. It's not exactly a union. It's something else. It's also a credentialing body. It's a lot of things. But I'm wondering, is anybody here in a union? Cool. Cool. Yeah, it was. Either presently or in the past? Yeah, that's cool. Not everyone is. That's also fine. But a union is a mechanism of helping to protect laborers, people who work for a living, from exploitative practices, because we are well aware that power doesn't often see things without demands, and that people need to be able to protect themselves and build power on their own. And it can be tremendously difficult to build that kind of power without a kind of collective endeavor. Now, I have spoken here about how I have been a street musician and a drag queen. Guess where there aren't unions? Not yet. Not yet. Is there a drag queen union in Nebraska? There are unions in Nebraska. Yeah. There's a carpenters union, but Nebraska is a right-to-work state, right? It is a right-to-work state. Same as East Tennessee, where I'm from. It is also a right-to-work state, which is a pretty perilous thing and kind of an oxymoron because it is a right to work. But what does that mean, friends? What does that mean? Right to exploit, indeed. It is largely, when I was growing up, I'm just speaking from the cuff and off the heart here, friends. I'm getting back in the saddle. When I was growing up, unions were maligned to me quite a bit growing up in the 90s. There was not fully explained to me. I was told it's this organization that you're required to pay dues to, but because of this right to work policy, this right to work legislation, you don't have to pay dues to the union. Then what do you get? What do you get? Nothing. No protections, no guardrails, no safekeeping, friends. The union dues that people pay allow a union to express itself within a workplace, and unions are not above criticism. They are certainly not above criticism. They are institutions imperfect as any, imperfect as ours. What do we say, though? It is about connection, not perfection. This is our mantra, something I wish more unions were able to reckon with as well, especially people who belong to them, because these can be massive institutions full of people with flawed logic and flawed reasoning, but ultimately, if we bind ourselves to a common end, can allow us to leverage power for the greater good. To an extent, the UMA does this for clergy. It allows us to work with other faith leaders to advocate for what is the standard of pay for ministers. How do we figure out what all of this is worth? Unions do that for their workers as well, to help advocate for pay, for time off. And gods know, y'all, we owe unions and labor movements of the past a great debt for things like an 8-hour workday, for things like paid time off, which I just benefited from, because we take this seriously here. We take this as a kind of sacred expression. It's not just a thing to go eat a picnic and have a hot dog. That is all one. But ultimately, I hope that as we move into Labor Day tomorrow, we can consider the blue-collar blues that do hang over workers in this country. You know, like I said, I was a drag queen and a street musician, but in between all of that, I was a janitor and a delivery driver. And I worked in a lot of kitchens. I still have a couple scars from 300-degree pizza ovens. In my research about labor movements in Omaha, I found that one of the first major strikes in Omaha was in 1900. It was a baker's strike, not the grocery store like bakers, people making bread. And I quote, dungeon-like conditions in basements all across the city, often with children who could barely reach into the oven. No such thing as air conditioning back then. And so people didn't get bread for a while, but guess what happened? People were able to advocate for themselves because they built power together. Now, I've talked about power quite a bit too, ever since I got from back to that Industrial Areas Foundation training. Power is not the purview, strictly speaking, of those with money and those with violence on their side. It is the capacity of people who rally their forces together to advocate for something larger than themselves. Power is something we build. So tomorrow, and all days, friends, hopefully, We can reflect on power not as a thing that is strictly the force of those who would oppress or harm or hurt, but power is a thing that is in our hands too, that is in our hearts as well, that we can rally with, that we can invite that deeper sense of solidarity with all those who strive to build a land where peace is born. Amen. Blessed be. Spirit of life, we work through our lives, do we not? We work to eat, to be, to love, and to live. Sometimes it can feel like the work of living is just that work. No matter how we work, in retirement or in labor, in life and in love, may we do so suffused with the vivacity, with that joie de vivre, with the passion, the chutzpah, the thing that keeps us tethered to this life and to one another. May we do what we do, whatever we do, with intention, with gratitude for the opportunity, but not lacking that fire that demands our dignity, that demands that we are respected, that knows that we are worthy of love toe to tip, whatever we've done, whoever we've been, however we may become, however we are becoming, or we are all becoming. May we know that our efforts and our labors lead the world towards a new shape, a shape of healing, a shape of justice. May all of this be named work, labor, effort, and may it all be named holy. Amen. Blessed be. When I was growing up, aside from having unions maligned to me, I really didn't know what Labor Day was about. My mother had told me plenty about being in labor with me, which is maybe a little strange. I thought it was about mothers for some reason. But of course, it is about work, the righteousness and the dignity of work. And for a long time, it has been about skilled labor. But what is skilled labor? What is unskilled labor, I suppose? Unskilled labor, in my estimation, is a myth to keep people desperate, right? Now, the first Labor Day was recognized in 1894. 10 years prior to that, it had begun as a mass protest in New York when 10,000 workers walked off the job to protest working conditions. Labor Day in this country was a compromise, perhaps actually a co-option to funnel a revolutionary sentiment into a legislated holiday, because folks were mad. Folks were mad. Remember I mentioned 1900s baker strike when there were children working in dungeon-like basements with huge furnaces. I'd be mad too. I hope you'd be mad, right? Anger is a way that guards our love. Anger is a righteous force that can guard our love, can move us into the world to say no and to demand our dignity, righteously so. The International Socialist Movement had in 1889 named May 1st as Labor Day to mark the Haymarket riots in Chicago in 1886, which was a violent affair where someone threw a stick of dynamite into a crowd. A lot of questions about how that emerged, but this is how most of the world celebrates their Labor Day on May 1st. In fact, in France, it is customary to riot in the streets. Our Labor Day is a bit more tame because it's kind of considered a patriotic holiday of picnics and football and such. On May Day in 1896, a riot broke out in Cleveland, Ohio, and then the Pullman Railway strike spread nationwide. As this strife rose, President Cleveland urged Congress to pass a federal holiday, not on May 1st, because he didn't want to give that to the Socialist Party, but on the first Monday in September. Of course, he didn't want that nod to the Socialist Party, so we celebrate it tomorrow, right? How much do we value work? In the book of Genesis, the creation of the world and all things is figured as labor, leading even God to rest. Rest would seem to be the just reward for a job well done, alongside pay and benefits. Few things feel better, or feed the heart, or tend the soul, and so it is this compromise day So it is that this compromise day must not lose its meaning, nor must the labors of love lose their meaning. And yet as time inches onward, we are prone to forget, to take for granted the world that has risen up around us, built by another's hands. Perhaps we even discount the necessity of our own labor, of our own efforts. Not all work is treated evenly. So-called unskilled laborers are often maligned, mistreated, underpaid, overworked. There is no such thing as unskilled labor. Folks often look at waiters and servers, people in the service industry, as being unskilled labor. They often rely upon a practice of tipping. Tipping has a tremendously racist history in this country, friends. Abroad, it's not common. When I was in France many years ago, I attempted to tip a waiter. He told me in no uncertain terms that he did not want my tip, that he was paid just fine. Tipping in this country emerges following the fall of slavery, when Black people were free, but they were not going to be paid for their work, but they might be owed a little tip. And here we have this practice echoing through time to today, where it is customary to tip 20-25%. Now, while the roots of tipping are indeed wicked, we still must tip, right? We still must tip, elsewise people are being paid minimum wage, perhaps less. 20 and 25%, y'all. Treat it like a prayer if you have to, but do tip. The very concept of unskilled labor is born out of the supposed necessity to create a class of grunts or peons, whom the talking heads and politicians now refer to ever so politely as essential workers, many of whom essentially took home little more money than they would have otherwise, all while working under the plague of COVID. What gives? Referring to the Bible again, what keeps this so-called Christian nation from fulfilling the top commandment? Jesus himself laid plain to love thy neighbor as thy love thyself. Perhaps we love ourselves too little, take too much of the magic of life for granted, forget just how interwoven we all are. Perhaps we are afraid of the revolution of the Spirit that would upset the status quo should the scales fall from our inner vision, that we may understand one another and our own selves as being inherently worthy of work and worthy of rest, and our work, whatever it may be, worthy of the name labor. By most metrics, organized labor has been in decline in the United States these past several years. As I mentioned, I have memories growing up of my folks maligning labor unions as inessential. That sentiment was rather widespread. Now, I can understand not wanting to pay union dues, but come on, you can't get something for nothing. Amongst my own generation, though, I detect a turning. For all the floundering of the 90s and the early 2000s, it seems a new thing may be breaking through. A new world may be being born in the midst of the old. We owe a tremendous debt to organized labor. Those brave souls who risked poverty, being fired, arrest, attack. While imperfect, they set about rallying their fellow workers to make demands on a time when working conditions were downright aberrant. Dungeon-like. Can't get that idea out of my head. Here in Omaha, it's tremendously easy to take things like an 8-hour day and paid time off and benefits for granted. But prior to the efforts of labor organizers, there was no such thing. People were just expendable tools for someone else's sense of profit. We forget too easily, perhaps, that folks who stock their power in the accumulation of capital alone will seldom offer benevolence out of the sheer kindness of their heart. And I do not mean to imply that wealthy people are evil. Far from it. But I confess, friends, I struggle to imagine how one becomes a billionaire without stepping on their neighbors. A certain bullheadedness is required, a certain disregard for the well-being of others. Perhaps my perspective is obfuscated by experiences of poverty, but I imagine I speak for at least some of us by being a little skeptical. And so we need a means of building power and organizing power enter unions. I've spoken on power a lot since that IAF training, but that theme haunts me, as I'd long been one to hold the idea of power in contempt. But like a veil being dropped, I now understand power is more than the weapon of the oppressor. It is a force. Lightning was never evil for felling a tree, nor is $1 in the billfold of a billionaire any more wicked than the one stuffed in your pocket. It is a measure of use. Apathy engenders a kind of wickedness. So long as ostensibly powerful folks can remain comfortable, they will take what they can. Meanwhile, the rest of us will suffer as we must. Yet, friends, I tell you, none should suffer more than they must, for we must make moves and invite that spirit of solidarity that sees us side by side with those advocating for their dignity, for a better wage, a better life, where we cannot expect it to be given without demand. It can be scary to make a demand. We may anticipate the crush, prefer to keep our head down and our mouths shut. But friends, this is not the demands of love, nor is the one who rushes solo suffused with passion only to be swatted away. Love unveils the bonds that bind us together. Love invites us into solidarity. Solidarity. Unity or agreement in feeling or action. Now, such an idea might prick up a particular feeling in us as Unitarian Universalists. You might be thinking, groupthink. The dreaded uniformity of thought. That's all fair. For there is a danger in eroding the will of the self in light of such a force. But friends, I say we are Unitarians, and there are many things we ourselves are already of one mind on. Would any amongst us say that questions are not valuable, perhaps even sacred, if that language has track with us? Politically, I imagine we have far more in common than not, as we understand this faith to be in and of and about the world, and so it must call us to particular concerns. When it comes time for collective action, solidarity is critical. One mind, unified, united, one idea. What idea? The idea that each of us deserves a better shake, a fair shake, that each of us deserves to live with dignity, that no one, no matter what they do for a living, ought to go home to hungry families or be hungry themselves. When it comes to labor, such an idea is the seed of organizing. As I said before, unions are imperfect institutions. Some might suggest that the adoption of a union is replacing one overlord for another, but the best unions abide by that iron rule. We lifted up the Sunday before I left, and also just now. Do not do for others what they can do for themselves. And considering disability advocacy and the dignity of blind folks, this is incredibly important. For what can make a heart feel more powerless than to have everything done for you? Real organizers don't go making a muck of things all on their own. They speak to folks directly, one-on-one, identify challenges, and ask a question with the nested challenge itself. What do you want to do about it? Questions like this led Saul Alinsky, the founder of the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is, again, the parent organization of OTOC, to, as a Jewish man in the early 20th century in Chicago, to organize various kinds of Catholics working in meatpacking plants, people who liked one another about as much as they liked Jewish people in that time. He was able to cut to the quick, to move past the identitarian elements and help them to identify what is ailing them, what is troubling them, and ask, what are you going to do about it? Didn't take too long for people to rally together and to help address their lack of pay, their poor working conditions. And while those organizations did not last the test of time, they didn't need to, because the work had been done. An 8-hour day, paid time off, sacred. We take this stuff seriously here, like it's sacred. We ensure our workers here get a fair shake as best the budget will allow, and ensure that they are compensated for travel and are able to take time off to recover without worrying if they're going to be able to make ends meet. We do this, etch this into our bylaws and personnel policies, not because some denominational overlord bids it so, but because anything else would be exploitative and run counter to those values of justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. It would be, in a word, unloving. And so, as your employee and your minister, I want to say thank you. May the grace and dignity you extend to workers here be extended unto yourselves and those you may manage, apart from this sacred place. May we invite that spirit of solidarity into our hearts, one mind in this at least, that we and all people are deserving, worthy, made in the image of the sacred. Each of us nodes in the web of life and the web of love, and may we live like it, y'all. May we live like it, and may we labor for it. Solidarity.